Our next speaker is Elyse Goin. Elyse has a background in formal and outdoor environmental education, where she regularly taught people ages 1 to 100 on land or at sea about the wonders of the ocean. She hopes to use her new skills and extensive knowledge base from the program to influence communities that are generally overlooked, as well as government entities. Early on, I solicited interest for an external fellowship that focused on climate change education and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We selected Elyse to be that climate education fellow. It was year 1 of a 5-year NSF grant, so as you might imagine, there were a lot of kinks to work out. But she masterfully and strongly led her team, became the resident expert on social science surveys, and quickly became an integral, indispensable member of this inaugural cohort of fellows. Elyse is a gifted communicator and educator who seems to know exactly what she wants to do with her career. She has a keen focus on community-scale climate change impacts. I can say with certainty that Elyse is going to have an impact in this space in the coming years. The title of her project is Risk Due to Climate Change: Lessons in Vulnerability Adaptation in Coastal Communities in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much. This is my grandmother, Elyse, and me, during my first and only trip to Trinidad and Tobago. My mom took my brother and I to see her in person for the very first time. I remember the look of her home. I'm remembering the taste of the curry chicken and roti that she prepared for us to eat. And looking at this photo, I'm remembering how tightly she hugged me. Louisa was the only grandparent that I was fortunate enough to meet ever since my parents moved over 3,000 miles away from their home of Trinidad and Tobago. The low-lying small island nation of Trinidad and Tobago is located in the Caribbean right next to Venezuela and is home to some of the most beautiful places you'll ever see in your life. My grandfather was a fisherman, a hobby he learned from his father. I imagine what the coasts and beaches used to look like when my grandparents were young kids. I wonder what they must have seen before climate change was identified as a threat to their home. I wonder if they were alive today, what would they be able to tell me about how things have changed? Therefore, when thinking about my capstone project and what I wanted to focus on, all I could think about was, how do the community members feel about their homes being impacted by climate change? So I decided to ask the community members themselves how they perceived climate impacts, and if those impacts posed any impending risk to their livelihood. I also wanted to discover what, if any, actions the community takes toward adaptation, and how those actions influence their vulnerability and resiliency in the face of climate change. This is important because the community has knowledge that has been passed down to them from their parents, and they have their own observed knowledge that can be helpful to others in times of crisis. People notice things and act to the best of their abilities, and these actions could be useful in other communities, towns, or coastal nations. Also, this is important for those who make political decisions on behalf of the community members. They need to understand the people they are supposed to be protecting. Trinidad and Tobago, like every other place on this planet, is experiencing impacts from climate change. As humans progress towards industrialization, the environment suffers. When fossil fuels are burned up for energy uses like producing electricity, gas emissions fill the atmosphere and act like a heat-trapping blanket. This heat-trapping blanket covers the planet and causes global warming or an overall change in climate. We have seen the ramifications of climate change, but small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago are more vulnerable to impacts due to their small size, relatively remote location, and exposure to other natural disasters. The main impacts from climate change that they face are flooding, coastal erosion, and sea level rise. These impacts are not mutually exclusive. For instance, as the sea level rises, it can cause further erosion of the coastline and flooding all at the same time. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, predicts that the sea level will rise by about 1 meter by the end of the century. 1 meter is about the height of a guitar. Imagine the water at the coast rising up to cover a guitar from bottom to top and never receding out to the ocean ever again. In order to hear directly from community members from the island of Trinidad, I created and administered an online survey. The 27-question survey received a certificate of exemption from the International Review Board for Ethics and was answered by 77 people. The survey was delivered to environmental organizations located throughout the northern region of Trinidad, as well as government entities and an academic institution. The respondents were between the ages of 18 and 65, and 95% of them have parents or grandparents who lived by the coast. The questionnaire was designed to allow for the community perspective to shine, while also providing information about specific climate impacts, observations, feelings, and actions following a climate event, as well as the level of risk a climate impact posed in their home region. I combined the results from the survey into an ArcGIS story map that is accessed online through the Human Ecology Laboratory at UC San Diego's website. The story map walks you through past climate observations and future predictions from two different points of view, from the government and from the community members. It also touches on climate impacts that can be seen now throughout the island of Trinidad, and the actions people take following a climate event. I created a story map to be able to showcase the people's voices and through time follow along with their various climate observations and explanations of risk. I want to focus in and share some of the findings shown in the story map from the community respondents, specifically climate impact observation, risk perception, and actions. Survey respondents were asked to identify observed climate impacts in the past, present, and if they expect them to continue in the future. The results of those questions are listed here on this chart. The first large row depicts flooding impacts. The second row shows coastal erosion. The third row shows sea level rise impacts. The fourth row are all other types of climate impacts, and the last row at the bottom are those who have not seen any climate impacts at any time. The time periods are also differentiated by color. The past is yellow, the present is orange, and the future is pink. Interestingly, flooding was the overall highest observed or future expected climate impact. Then, I also saw that sea level rise was the lowest observed or expected climate impact, apart from the other category. And most respondents actually failed to see present climate impacts in their areas, the orange bars, compared to the past or expected future time periods. Basically, this data shows that people have observed climate impacts and don't expect them to end anytime soon. The survey respondents are expecting climate change to continue, and the dip in current sightings does not mean that future impacts won't be worse than they are now. It's like watching your hair grow. You can't look at your hair in the mirror and see it actively growing, but if you leave it alone for a year, you'll see a dramatic change in its length. We can't see things slowly changing over time. However, the problem with climate change is that small changes in the Earth's atmosphere lead to devastatingly harmful climate events. With the influx of flooding, erosion, and sea level rise come other adverse effects that put risk on human livelihood and safety. These effects can include loss of land, a decline in tourism, which is a major source of income for locals, population displacement, disease transmittance, and potential loss of life. When something threatens a person's way of life or their values, it is labeled as a risk. Once a risk has been identified, people start to take actions toward mitigating that risk. For example, if you have a pool in your backyard and you don't know how to swim, that's a serious risk. Potential ways to mitigate that risk could be to wear a life vest when you're outside, or even taking swimming lessons. But if a person does not perceive any risk with having a pool and not knowing how to swim, then they will not take any action toward mitigating that risk. Risk perception of climate impacts is crucial to begin adaptation to climate change. This graph portrays risk perception results from the survey respondents. Most of them agree that there is a real risk from climate change. I did see a noticeable increase, however, in respondents who define these impacts as risks rather than just another climate impact. For example, from the time period bar chart, 29% of respondents labeled sea level rise as an impact in the past, but 51% of people label it as a risk. 48% more individuals consider sea level rise as a risk. These high-risk percentages should denote an array of adaptation methods and mitigation responses. Sadly, I discovered that roughly half of the survey respondents did not have a proactive response to a climate event. The responses included passive actions that included waiting around or staying inside until the waters recede. This was surprising to me given the large number of people who identified a risk and described the type of effect it had on their community. One person even said that flooding causes damage to property, potential loss of life, danger to animals, and biodiversity. There must be more that community members can do, and there must be a reliable information source to turn to in times of crisis. This source must come from within the community and provide actions that will ensure security. There is a need for community-based and organized environmental efforts to tackle the effects of climate change and to protect livelihoods. Certain individuals need a place to turn to in time of need, and community organizations are just the source. There are groups in the nation of Trinidad and Tobago who are already contributing towards this effort, but more work must be done to inform all people who are at risk. Some of the survey respondents did provide positive actions, like assisting others or notifying officials. For these people, they can be the catalyst for more risk adaptation methods in Trinidad and Tobago. The full story map can be found at this ArcGIS link, or it can be found online at humanecology.ucsd.edu. And none of this will be possible without the help of my Capstone Advisory Committee. The chair was Dr. Isabel Rivera Collazo. I have Mr. Ernie Brazier and Mr. Carver Backus. Also, I would love to thank all of the organizations who partnered with me on this journey. They are all listed here, and there are many more who went nameless and still responded to my survey. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. And also thank you to my family who's watching online, and to my fiance, Alex. Happy birthday.
All right, Elyse, we have a couple of questions coming in. So is there anything else that isn't shown on StoryMap that you did, or that is shown on StoryMap that you did not include in this presentation?
Yes, there's a lot on that story map, so I definitely encourage you all to look at it online. It's already up on the Human Ecology website, but it really goes into depth about all the past impacts, and it actually shows the specific locations that the community respondents told me that they saw these things, and I think that's really important. It also goes into more depth about the risks that they perceived, and it has a lot more photos and videos like what you saw in the presentation today. They were all provided by a Trinidadian photographer, videographer, producer, Juliet McCauley. So definitely go ahead and check it out for yourself.
Great. And were all of the actions following a climate event passive in nature? What kind of proactive responses did you receive on the survey following a climate event?
Yeah, the actions, I mean, most of them were kind of passive, but a few of the respondents actually gave me proactive responses. Some people mentioned specific government agencies, like the Office for Disaster Preparedness and Management. Some people also said that they like to share these things on their social media, so that way they can reach more people before they come into areas of flooding or erosion. So there were quite a few positive responses that I was really, really proud of and happy to see. Awesome, thank you.